Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. We've got a double shot today for you. Well, there's not a double shot in this video, but a double shot with the free video that we just gave you for ranking the studio albums of Free. Now we're going to move on to ranking the studio albums of Traffic. So, two great British bands today from the late 60s, early 70s. I know a lot of folks love this band. I love this band. I think one of the things that I always like so much about Traffic is you just could never kind of put them in any kind of box, right? Traffic just didn't sound like anybody else. You couldn't really classify them. Yeah, they were a rock band, but man, they also played some kind of jazzy stuff and some folky stuff and some poppy stuff and some psychedelic stuff, some prog stuff. They kind of did a little bit of everything. They threw some hard blues rock at you from time to time too. Stellar musicians, the vocals of Steve Winwood and his fantastic organ playing and guitar playing, and Jim Capaldi, Chris Wood, and Dave Mason and for a couple spells, right? Just a great band, a very, very unique band who had again, not a long career, right? I mean, they were around for about 6-7 years, something like that, right? Released a handful of albums and came back and released another studio album in the 90s that kind of really wasn't Traffic, but it's got the name Traffic on it, whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank just the studio albums. I'm not going to include those couple of live albums, right, or any compilations. Just the studio albums from my least favorite to my favorites. I will say, other than the one coming at the bottom, which is Traffic Far From Home. This came out in the 90s. Other than this one, and this is not awful, it's certainly not really that good. It's okay. It's kind of more almost like a Steve Winwood solo album, with Jim Capaldi on it. And it's it's pretty lightweight. It's pretty mellow. It's kind of poppy. It's got a couple decent tracks on it. But all in all, I've always kept it. I bought it when it first came out because I was so excited to see a new Traffic album. Then I was kind of like, this is kind of disappointing. So, but, it is what it is, right? I guess it was good to see one last gasp from the Traffic camp, even though, like I said, it's basically a Winwood solo album. But, definitely my least favorite Traffic album. All the other ones all have some pretty strong material on them, pretty solid stuff. A couple of the albums are way better than some of the others. Some of the latter period ones, at least before they broke up in the 70s, are maybe not great albums, but there's some really fantastic material on them. So next up, I'm going to go with, and again, I like this album a lot, When the Eagle Flies. Again, a really different album from them. It's kind of jazzy. It's kind of proggy. The title track just kicks ass. Something New is pretty good. Memories of Rock and Rolla, Graveyard People. It's a different album from them, but still really kind of cool. I actually didn't get this till I did not have this I've been a Traffic fan for quite a long time. And for whatever reason, I didn't have this until I think I got this in the late 90s or early 2000s or something like that. Because this was out of print for a while and what have you. But this is a cool album, different. It's not one of my favorites, but I still like it. It's definitely different. Man, all the rest of these, there's not much that separates them. Like I said, each album here is very different from each other. They all have really cool tracks on it. I'm going to go next up with Shootout at the Fantasy Factory. I almost hate putting it this low because I do like this a lot, but it's whatever. Like I said, we're just for the purpose of ranking them. We're just ranking them so we can talk about them, and it's definitely not one of my favorite Traffic albums, but I do like it. I think the title track is really, really cool. A very, very good song. Evening Blue, I love. Sometimes I feel so uninspired. I mean, there's no weak tracks on here. Roll Right Stones, 13 and change. The band doing they're kind of little jazz fusion-y, folky, proggy, psych type of thing. Just really kind of sophisticated music. That's one thing I always kind of said when I talk about Traffic is especially the latter part of their career, really sophisticated, intelligent, adult music, right? Their early kind of psychedelic stuff, the psychedelic and British pop stuff is kind of there's a certain charm to that. Very English sounding, but they kind of morphed into a different thing after they released those first couple albums. So next, I'm going to go with Mr. Fantasy next. My issue with Mr. Fantasy, there's some stuff on here that I absolutely adore. We all love the title track. I wish there was more stuff like the title track on here, but Heaven is in Your Mind, cool little kind of folky psychedelic pop song. Berkshire Poppies, House for Everyone, No Face, No Name, and No Number. Dealer's pretty cool. Colored Rain's got some nice harmonies in it. This is a nice, fun album. It's kind of like Traffic, very naive, very Traffic in their infant stages. Fun stuff, almost like the band, trying to, the influence of the Beatles is absolutely huge on this album and the follow-up to this. But to me, it's like I don't really think the Traffic kind of found their way yet. Once they became more of a kind of like a jazzier rock band, I kind of started to like them a little better. But this is a very kind of charming album, all right? A lot of people dig it. Last Exit I'm going to go with next. It might be an interesting pick for some. But I have always really dug tunes like Medicated Goo and Shanghai Noodle Factory. Something's Got a Hold of My Toe. I just, there's something about this album that I always really dug. It's got some great grooves and rhythms on it. Some really kind of funky playing from the band. And I think it's just this album is a little out there, I think, but that in a good way, for me anyway. I don't know. I just always really gravitated towards this one a lot for whatever reason. Next up, I'm going to go with the self-titled release Traffic. Okay, their sophomore or second release. Again, not all that different from the first album, but I think the band may be kind of figuring things out a little bit more. It's a little more of a rock album, I think. You can all join in. Pearly Queen obviously is great. You got Feeling All Right on here. Classic Dave Mason track. 40,000 Headmen. Amazing song. Okay. Crying to Be Heard. Means to an End. Some short tunes for the most part, but I think the maturity of Traffic as a band from the first album to this one, pretty easy to kind of decipher there. I mean, for me, I listened to both these albums back to back, and I can hear some differences here. I know they were recorded fairly close to each other, but they just sound like they're really gelling as a band here. But both really good albums, those first two. All right, my number two. Okay, it was kind of tough, these ones. My number one was always going to be my number one, but some of these others were a little tough, and this could change at any given time because that's how much I really like these albums. I'm going to go with John Barleycorn, Must Die, as my number two favorite among the Traffic discography. Not a lot of songs, and most of these albums are, at least the later ones, not a lot of tracks on them because the band's starting to get into more long-form compositions. Glad is such a great kind of like funky rocker, right? It's got a little jazz. Just a really, really well-written kind of, like I said, funky, jazzy rocker. Just totally dig it. Freedom Rider. Great song. Empty Pages, classic Traffic. John Barleycorn, the title track is amazing. Every Mother's Son, Stranger to Himself, just like top to bottom, a really, really great album. Some folk influences big time on this album, but kind of like not your traditional type folk. I mean, that's again, I hate to keep kind of repeating myself here, but there's just something about this band that was so different from every other rock band on the scene at the time. There's nobody ever sounded like Traffic, right? Just so unique. None more so than on the Low Spark of High Heel Boys. If I'm not mistaken, this is their biggest selling album in their discography, probably for a reason. Little mix of everything on here. All right, the title track, all 12 minutes and change, just a kind of really... what do you call the Low Spark of High Heel Boys, that song? Is it prog? Is it rock? Is it jazz? Is it pop? Who knows, right? It's got elements of everything, but it's something, it's a totally, completely different beast. All right? Hidden Treasure, great rock and roll stew, a great bluesy hard rock tune, okay? Many a Mile of Freedom, just irresistible melodies up the yin-yang, right? Light Up or Leave Me Alone. Dun, 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 dun. I mean, it's fantastic bluesy rock song. And then the mysterious, haunting Rainmaker. I mean, this album was kind of hard to beat. This is, you talk about it, course of history, rock history, people often talk about desert island discs, right? That's like a term that was thrown around quite a bit for a while back then. You know, if you had to like bring a small chest of albums or CDs with you, you know, you can only take like if I can only take 50 albums with me, would I take one of these? This one here? Yeah, you might have to, right? This is just like a perfect album, top to bottom. I dig it. And again, it's just like all the rest of their albums, just so freaking different. So unique, so Traffic. Okay, so there you have it. That's my ranking of the Traffic studio album discography. Your mileage may vary. For all you guys who love my Pete-isms, right? I know there's certain things I just can't help but say. It is what it is. But yeah, you may feel differently about some of these, and that's totally cool because, you know, most of this, for me anyway, you know, with the exception of Far From Home, which, you know, is by far their weakest thing. It's, you know, it's, for me, it's almost not even a full-blown Traffic album, obviously. But the rest of them, yeah, you could make a case for any one of them being like the masterpiece in their discography. They're all really, really cool, right? All really different. But this is kind of how they, you know, how I gravitate towards them. So let's recap, right? Coming in at number 1, The Low Spark of High Heel Boys. Coming in at 2, John Barleycorn, Must Die. Coming in at number 3, self-titled Traffic. Coming in at number 4, Last Exit. Coming in at number 5, Mr. Fantasy. Also, I wanted to throw out there, if you haven't heard it, Heaven is in Your Mind, which was basically the original U.S. pressing of this album, okay? So you've got different track listings, a couple different songs and what have you. I found this a while back. I was like, oh, I got to get that because kind of a neat little, you know, the first pressing of their debut album was this, and then it's like, whoop, pulled this off, re-release it as this, just like the rest of the planet. So I just figured I'd throw that in there right now. Mr. Fantasy. Next up, coming in there, where did I leave off? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is Shootout at the Fantasy Factory. Coming in at number 7, When the Eagle Flies. Again, very fine album, as all these are. And then coming at last, number 8 is Far From Home. Like I said, not a huge fan of this album, but whatever. It's Traffic, right? So there we have it. Ranking. Lost track of, what was I? What am I talking about? Am I getting that old? And I'm like forgetting things mid-sentence? Jesus. Ranking the studio albums for Traffic. So you know the deal. Guys, down below in the comments, we want to know how you feel about the Traffic discography. How would you rank these 8 albums from your favorite to your least favorite? Or maybe you just want to talk about your couple favorites, or maybe you don't want to talk about Traffic at all. Hey, that's fine too, whatever. But we want to hear what you got to say, what you think, all right, about this great band. And while you're doing that, make sure you don't forget to visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on the YouTube all the damn time. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Hope you like this little bonus one I threw at you today. I was going to save this for tomorrow, but I had a little break in the action here in my workday today, and I figured, you know what? If I got 15 minutes, I'm going to do some Traffic. All right? So we'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow. All right? Same bat time. Well, maybe not same bat time. Same channel, definitely. All right? Take care, guys. Bye-bye.